Let's get into it.
Thanks so much for coming back into our class. As you'll remember, I'm the faculty at UC Berkeley under College of Engineering, which is where our class is domiciled. And we are really excited to have you back. Almost everyone in the class has certainly heard from you before in one capacity or another, whether it's out of class content in past semesters or assigned reading in the class. But it's always really awesome to have you in person. We actually had students submit questions for you in advance. And out of this spreadsheet that I'm looking at, there's at least nearly 100 different questions. So we're going to try our best to kind of bucket all of those questions in. Maybe to start, one of the top questions that was submitted kind of across categories was, given your experiences of running your own startup and then of course investing in startups, what has been some of your biggest struggles?
Everything in running a startup, everything is a struggle. I would say that what I learned about myself is that I really enjoy struggles. Like, actually, what I learned about myself in college was that without struggle and crisis, I don't bring my A game. So my name in college was same day Seibel, because I'd have to complete my papers on the same day to be inspired to do them at all. So I think there's like a lot of this like hoopla around like, oh, struggle is bad and strife is bad. And it's like, at least when it's come to my life, like my best moments have been when things are the most stressful and crazy. So that's on the startup side. And then honestly, I think a lot of people don't really understand what Y Combinator is. I would not put it under the investor category. Our jobs, our lives don't look like normal investors. YC is run a lot more like a company. And so I would really argue like my first startup experience was like as a founder of an early stage company. And like, this is my second startup experience. And it's basically as an executive in a later stage company that's still full of like drama and strife and yada, yada. And I think what you'll realize in the end of the day is that the people who perform the best under pressure are given a lot of responsibility. And the people who don't aren't. And so sort yourselves accordingly based on what drives happiness in your life. If you want to avoid pressure, great. If you love pressure, great.
That's actually perfect time to also talk about what are your favorite aspects of doing something much earlier versus, of course, now in your role, in the executive role of what, in your words, is a later stage company.
Yeah, these are like student questions. I hate these kinds of questions. Like, who cares? Like, what I have most fun doing? Like, the question should be, what do you have most fun doing? Like, I've enjoyed both. I just like getting punched in the face, and I've gotten that in a big company, and I've gotten that in a small company. I worked at Autodesk for a while, and I hated that. So there you go. Those are my preferences in the world.
So given that we have a ton of student questions, what we will do is prioritize live questions of folks who are obviously here. I think there's also folks who have previously submitted forms with multiple questions online. So what we can do is if anyone has a burning question, please raise your hand, whether you're in person or you're virtual, raise your hand and then ask your question. Otherwise, I will tackle the biggest buckets of questions that were submitted. And actually, the third biggest bucket of questions, other than your challenges, your favorite parts, has been your biggest lessons. So a lot of folks are trying to start companies for the very first time, and a lot of them are going to fall into similar pitfalls. And of course, a ton of those lessons they can learn through YC. But curious to hear your thoughts on what can they learn pre that during their college days? What can they do now? And then otherwise, lessons that you think would be relevant for folks that are on call.
So I think what's interesting is that my biggest lessons and your biggest lessons will be very different. So when I did startups, this whole thing was in 2006. That's when things started for me. And to set the scene, this was like post the 2001 crash, and people kind of felt like the tech scene was dead. So that's number one. Number two, raising money was almost impossible. Like the term angel investor like was just becoming popularized. In many ways, like some of the most famous angel investors now were just like early Google employees back then who had a fuck ton of money because Google IPO'd. So it was a different time. And I think the biggest gift that I had was that our expectations were really low. We were just happy that someone would let us do a company at all. Like we were like 21, 22, 23. Like we were just happy that someone would let us do this, that we could be our own bosses. I think nowadays, the thing that fucks people is their expectations are all destroyed and horrible. It's like, oh, well, some of you have friends who have raised money, or you will have friends who've raised money. Starting companies seems a lot easier. A lot more people are doing it. And so suddenly you look at this as like, oh, the only thing that's worth doing is winning. And you set these really stupid expectations. Like if we're not winning within 3 months, we're losing. If we're not winning within 6 months, we're losing. And unfortunately, what most of you will never understand is that no startup feels like it's winning, even when it's winning. Right? Like Airbnb thought it was winning. It was on the road to IPO, and then COVID hit. Can you imagine being a company that's like months away from IPOing and your bankers basically tell you, well, we're going to rip up all those docs because that's useless. You might die. Right? And everyone thought they won. They thought they won. So I think that what young people can do to really help themselves is like reset their expectations and just enjoy working on a startup and understand your relative privilege to be able to work on a company at all, right? Because like, while in our community now, this is pretty common, in the worldwide community, this is still rare as fuck. And if you're having fun and you're working with people who you like, and you're working for users that you like, you're getting an A. Like that's the A. Whereas like, I think for a lot of people, man, they just have horrible ideas on what's working and what's not. And like, oh, we're not on TechCrunch yet. We didn't get into YC. It's not worth it. We're not growing. It's not worth it. Like, oh, it's all just garbage. And I see founders psych themselves out. Like the market's not killing them. The users aren't killing them. They're killing themselves with stupid expectations. So that's probably my biggest takeaway for you. For me, it's different, but that was 06. I can't go back in time.
So I see Kim has put a question in chat. Kim, if you're on call, oh, actually, I see her on video. Maybe you can ask that question live.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Michael. I know that the YC Winter 22 demo day just concluded. I wonder what do you think are the freshest, biggest takeaways for you as YC and also for current early stage startup founders?
Kim, can you give me an example of a takeaway that you would like? This is my 19th batch. Demo days are like the seasons at this point. You're kind of asking me like, what was unique about last fall? I'm like, I don't fucking know. Like, it's my 39th last fall. Like, it happened.
Absolutely.
But what's an example of like what are you actually digging for?
Yes. So what are the new trends or things that you see have been changing that startup founders should be aware of today?
What kind of trend are you looking for? Go deeper. Fundraising trends, idea trends, what do you actually want?
I was looking for kind of broadly for the fundraising and trends and also for building a startup in general.
I don't know what a general trend is. Can you give me an example? Like the internet's good? People like crypto? What are we talking about?
Yeah, I would say for me specifically, I think, for ideas, there are always different trends in different days, like Web3 or etc. But aside from these like very hyped trends right now, what are the kind of the ideas, for example, like hardware, or just,
So I think I understand your question. I think that like what you're doing is you're trying to ask me what's going to be the wave of the future so that maybe you would know about that and maybe want to create a company there.
Well,
is that what you're asking?
Not exactly. Sorry.
So then I don't know what you're asking. Like,
Yeah.
how
Let
about
me
this?
try
Why
one
don't
more
you take a
time.
couple minutes to think about what you're asking? We'll take another question and then come back.
All right. All right.
Yeah. Who's next?
Thanks, Michael.
I see a raised hand, Sumin, right?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. My question is, I believe YC reduced the founder's trial and error and then optimize the process to go forward to success or make their product. So my question is, how do you systemize this kind of process to give their know-hows and how to build a product things? So this kind of knowledges are combined with personal knowledge or know-how. So these things are not knowledge in books. So how did you make them systemized knowledge or organizational knowledges?
So let's zoom out here and let's ask the question a slightly different way, right? Like YC is trying to give its founders an unfair advantage. That's what we're trying to do. We want to give them an unfair advantage. And you're basically asking, like, how do we build a machine to give founders an unfair advantage when the founders are at different stages, doing different ideas, different parts of the world, so on and so forth? I'm happy to talk about that. I would say the first thing that YC does is splits the world into things that you should be worried about as an early stage founder and things you should not be. So you should be worried about talking to users and building something they want. You shouldn't be worried about getting screwed on paragraph 27 of the document that you're using to fundraise. You should be worrying about communicating your company effectively in a pitch to investors. You shouldn't be worried about spending all of your time networking to meet investors. So we basically divide up the world in the shit that like actually can help you build stuff that people want and the other shit. And then we basically try to help either automate that other stuff or give you very specific advice on how to do that other stuff, or to build structures like demo day to make that other stuff easier. So you can spend as much time as possible trying to figure out how to build things people want. What we tell the founders is we can't tell you how to build things people want. We're not your users most of the time. But when we see companies die, it's almost often because they're not spending enough time with their users building things they want. They're distracted with fundraising or with press or with some weird structural thing or with things that their friends tell them are important, but just simply are not, or things that look more glamorous or hiring or all these other things. So we basically give founders guidance on how to minimize the amount of time the shit doesn't matter, how to minimize that time, and then freedom to work on the things that do matter. And what we tell the founders in the beginning of the batch is that we aren't experts in success. Like, we do not know how to make your users like you. We're experts in failure. We know how YC companies die. And what we can do is we can tell you if you're pattern matching to the like most common death paths, not only do we tell you that you're pattern matching there, we explicitly describe those to you so you can recognize those paths in your own startup and avoid them. And our kind of thesis is that if this machine, it's almost like the machine's keeping you on life support, but it's not healing you. Imagine you're like a patient with some horrible illness, right? We're keeping you alive while your body's healing itself. The alive part is like a little bit of money and access to investors and access to the advice on how not to die. And the really hard part is your like body actually repairing itself, AKA building something that people actually want. And I think that founders really don't understand that's the game. They think that investors are like teachers and can like teach them how to be successful in their company. And they're not. I think one thing that you'll realize for the rest of your working life is that there are very few people you'll encounter like teachers ever again. People like employed to teach you something, that's going to go extinct in your life. Like, done. And anything that you kind of try to put into that category, you do that at your detriment, because those people have motivations and interests of their own. Whereas like teachers are most often selfless. Like you trust them because their motivation is just to improve you. Those kinds of people don't exist in the rest of the world. All right, I hope that was helpful. Who's next?
That's great. I
Thank
saw a
you.
brief hand from Carla. We can come back to you. I don't see your hand up anymore. Oh, great. So we'll
Yeah,
take Carla
I'm here.
and then on to David and Jonathan.
Go ahead, Carla.
Yeah. Hey, Michael. My question is for founders that are not in YC. How do you think that is the best way to set the scene where we don't focus on investment, hiring, and so on?
Read the advice. All of the YC content is online. It's on our YouTube channel. It's in the YC Startup Library. It's in PG Essays. It's all online. Like there's some secret stuff, but most of that stuff's related to how to get the best out of YC when you're in it. All of our general startup advice is online. You can read it.
Yeah.
We're in a weird
I
world
mean,
here
like,
where like the secrets aren't secret. The problem is the founders don't read. Like the median founder doesn't believe that the secrets to not dying are just free on the internet. And so they like rely on like their friend or some investor who's an idiot or like normal sources of secrets. And like, what's so funny is this game is so hard. It's so hard to make something that users want that like holding the other stuff back, the other advice back as a secret makes it doesn't, it's irrelevant. If this was a different business, like imagine this was mining. In mining, like secrets are probably helpful. Like where the gold is a big secret. How to extract it out 10% better is a huge secret, right? And like, so, you know, if you want to be great at mining, you probably have to do the normal secret gathering. In our world, it's like, I can tell you the whole story of Airbnb, A to Z, all the screw ups, all the successes, and then say, go build something that kills Airbnb, and you still have no shot at doing it. It's still, you know, rounds to zero. They had almost no shot at doing it. So it's kind of weird, right? We're in a weird world where like, I can give you the answer sheet and it's only kind of helpful. But it is all online. The answer sheet's online.
and can I do a
Go ahead.
about the first question that someone made? I would like to know, in your opinion, what is the vision of the world in fintech in B2B payments?
What do you mean? What's the vision of the world? What is that? What would you like me to answer there? What's your vision for
Like how
B2B payments in the world?
Something similar to the
You're breaking up. So
so
Carla,
okay.
I'll answer that question differently. It's not my job to have visions for the future and then find founders to agree with those visions and fund them. That's how the worst investors act. And there are a lot of bad investors, and that's how they act. And they tweet about their like, oh, I believe in life extension. If you like life extension, come talk to me. Or they tweet about like, oh, I believe in crypto, whatever the fuck. If you believe in this, come talk to me. And they think that they're builders by tweeting. You're not a builder when you tweet. Investors aren't fucking builders. We're not builders at all, right? The way I look at this is I look at a founder who's capable, who has a vision for the future, and I say, let's give him money and see what happens. Because that's what YC did for us. You know, this wasn't like, our company wasn't PG's thesis. He didn't have this idea in the back of his head and find young people to build it. The exact opposite. His exact quote when he gave us money was, I just want to give you money to see what the fuck happens. That was his investment thesis. Let's see what happens. And so I think that we have this saying at YC, like, let's not be too smart. It's not our job to be talking to users and figuring out how to make the world a better place. That's your job. And if you have a compelling vision for how the world should be better, my job is to say, fuck it. Let's see if you're right. And if I have opinions that are too strong, I can easily convince you your opinions are bad, which is stupid, because what do I know? Or I can get you to change your idea, which is stupid, because what do I know? So that's not the game. At least for people who are good playing the game, that's not the game. People who are bad, you know, they'll tweet a lot about what ideas you should be working on. Who's next?
Hey, Michael, we have someone in person who wants to ask a question.
Attack.
Hello. Hey, Michael. I was wondering, so since you have many blockchain startups, of course, in YC, and you work with a Safe, but recently there's been the SAFT, basically. So I guess you know what it is, but for those who don't, like investing against token instead of equity. Is it considered in the roadmap of YC to do that?
I would say this. I don't think a SAF is necessarily well understood yet. I don't think building successful products funded by tokens is well understood yet.
Okay.
So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that the most successful crypto companies are companies with shareholders and boards and yada, yada, yada. If it proves that the next generation of successful crypto companies are not companies, there's something else, you better believe we'll be set up to fund them. But I like to separate out like how a company is organized from how it's serving its users. And in my experience, founders should spend a lot more time innovating on how they're serving their users and solving a problem, and a lot less time innovating on how they're organized from a corporate perspective. Because the whole corporate organization is just a means to an end. And so I think that we have funded, I think there's about 25 Web3 crypto, whatever you want to kind of call them, companies in the batch. And I think that they broadly split up into 3 categories. What I kind of call YC's bread and butter, B2B SaaS. It's like, look, there are all these DAOs out there. They need services. Let's like do the standard move of giving them software that they need, right? Like we've got a company that's basically giving people multi-sig accounts so that they can spend their money more effectively, right? That makes sense. I would say group 2 are the folks who are actually trying to build direct services that can help people. And then group 3 are the people who don't wear the crypto label, the ones that you don't know about. There are a number of companies in the batch that are making it easier for anyone in the world to open a USD bank account or to transfer money from between developing countries without having to go through regulated banking systems. They don't put Web3 on their chest. They don't raise on tokens, but you know what they do? They solve 2 really important problems. If you're living in a developing country, and you want to buy goods to sell in your country, your bank won't do foreign exchange for you. Boom. You have to go on the street to buy USD. And I mean like oftentimes literally the street to buy USD so that you can send that across the world to buy goods to sell in your country. Crypto can solve that problem. It is solving that problem. If you live in a certain country and you want to work for a US company and make a great wage, because you're a programmer, let's say, a US bank won't give you a bank account. Crypto is solving that problem. And so I kind of like separating those 2 things out. And like, if it turns out that changing the organization of companies creates a lot of efficiency, that's amazing. Like, we'll be all about it. But like, isn't our job to serve people? So like, shouldn't I be more caring about the ends, who's being served, the people being served, than the means, what the corporate structure is? And that's kind of how I think about it. And so we have a lot of crypto companies, and we had Coinbase speak at the batch, we had OpenSea speak in batch, and they both said the same thing. Right now, it's not obvious to us that the corporate structure is hurting us. So we're not necessarily, that's not top of the list to fix. So there you go. Who's next?
David.
Hello, Michael. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for your time. One question. Can you give me any advice for building a hearted company based in your experience?
Don't do it.
Really?
Yeah, don't do it. You know,
Why?
I think there's a gross misunderstanding of like what Elon Musk's experience is in the world versus what the average founder's experience is, or what Elon Musk's set of possible outcomes are versus the average founder's set of possible outcomes. And it's weird because I think America kind of creates this, right? Like America is the place that kind of says like, you can grow up to be anything. And like, in some ways that's true, but in other ways, if you were to actually take a second and talk about all of the most successful hard tech companies that are out there and how they were started versus all of the most successful software companies that are out there and how they were started, you'd find two different stories. You'd find that like a lot of fairly not that successful, poor first-time founders are the ones who created a lot of the software products that you're using. And you wouldn't find necessarily the same percentage of those types of people doing the hard tech ones. And so whenever I meet a founder who's doing a hard tech startup, my first job is to try to convince them not to. And try to get them to study why this should be their second startup, why it's so much easier to start SpaceX when you've already sold PayPal for $1 billion. Now, if I'm not successful, my second step is, if you're going into a game that's 100 times harder than the hard game of building a successful software company, my only next piece of advice is you better do 100 times more research. You better know about every single hard tech company that's been created in the last 25 years, how they got money, what the successes were, what the most common failures were. Whenever you meet a software founder, you must say, I need to be 100 times better than them because my challenge is 100 times greater. And the YC founders who succeed in hard tech hold themselves to that standard. Like we got folks building satellites, like they make a mistake, the company dies. For the software folks, making mistakes is a daily thing. You make a mistake on a multi-million-dollar or tens of million-dollar satellite, boom, you're done. And so if you're willing to hold yourself to that 100x standard, then great, go do it. But if you're doing hard tech because you think it's cool and sexy, it's going to deliver a lot of disappointment. And I think what's tricky is that a lot of the interest in hard tech is coming from one, a lot of Elon's work that's been building up over literally 2 decades, and two, a lot of stupid investors tweeting. And what's unfortunate is like, I see the numbers, the volume of tweets about hard tech versus the volumes of checks, fucking crazy different. How many people do you see tweeting about B2B SaaS? Not that much. That's where most of the checks are going. And so if you are trying to build your impression of how our ecosystem works based on the like popular media that's being shoved to you, it's like a lie. Unfortunately, it's like a lie. You know, for every one hard tech company that does well in YC, there's like literally 100 software companies that do well. So that's how I think about it. But let's be clear, like I said up top with the last question, like if this is your life's mission, no words coming out of my mouth can stop you, right? So good luck to you. All right, next question.
So right before we move on to Jonathan, I just want to help students connect the dots between this semester and some of the stuff that you shared last semester. One of the things that you shared that really stood out to me was how in a school environment, the school is really designed around the student being at the center. You have professors and mentors and everyone designed to support you. But after you leave school, you're really on your own, including, I know, David, thinking about building a hardware startup where you need to design your own ecosystem to figure out who the right people to go to are. And so to particularly difficult startups like hardware startups, you do need to start thinking about now what it looks like when you have to design your own ecosystem. And on it, Jonathan.
Michael, just a quick question. What's the biggest reason right now why startups die?
Let's split that up into 2 categories. Non-YC companies and YC companies. The biggest reason why non-YC companies die is because they never get their shit together to get a product out at all. They just like I'm sure a lot of you have startups or friends doing startups where it's still at the like talking basic prototype, like they don't even get to the launch first customer stage. They just don't have the will to get that far.
But why? Are they not working enough, or is it just they don't have the vision?
This world's not for most people, because it sucks. It's hard. It's stressful to put yourself out publicly and accept no's. Most people, that's not what they find enjoyable, and rightly so, right? Like most people, I argue, like most people are like smart and they avoid this world like the plague because it's like full of so much disappointment. And some people are weird and crazy and like they don't mind getting punched in the face. And what's cool about the world is it creates opportunities for both types. And one type isn't better or worse than the other. It's just the things that make you happy don't make the person next to you happy, and vice versa. And so I think a lot of what gets people to die, non-YC companies, is that like they start trying and they realize I don't like this and they go do something else. For YC companies, it is similar. The most common cause of death for YC companies within the first 2 years is suicide, not homicide. So it's not like it's not a competitor or some shit like that. It's typically they fall out of love with their users, or they actually never really loved their users to start with. And after they realize how hard this is going to be, they're like, why am I breaking my back for these fuckers? Or they fall out of love with their co-founders, or they never really loved their co-founders to start with. They did that stupid thing, was like, oh, well, I'm a tech guy, I need a business guy, like, or I'm a business guy, I need a tech guy. And they started coming with someone they don't like. And they realize, oh shit, if we're attached to the hip for 10 years, I got to hang out with this person for 10 years. I'd rather kill myself. So in the first 2 years, it's committing suicide. Those are usually the two things. Interestingly enough, like 2 years out from YC, it's 50-50 death rate. Isn't that crazy? If you can survive 2 years post your YC batch, you got a 50-50 chance dead or alive 10 years later, which still to my date, to this day blows my mind, right? There are companies that are still alive from my last batch, which was winter 12, doing fine. What kills companies after that 2 year point is typically some version of they believe they have product market fit, and so they transition into company building and spending, and they don't. And so their growth stalls, their product actually isn't good enough, but their spending accelerates, and that'll kill you. So those are the most common high-level death paths.
Thanks.
Good question.
Hey, Michael, another person in class who wants to ask a question.
All right.
Hey, Michael, this is Arturo. Aside from company building, I just wanted to ask, what common characteristics have you seen in successful founders and successful companies that you kind of have seen? Obviously not a one-size-fits-all approach, but what are some common characteristics that show you and are good indicators to good founders and committed founders that will be successful in the long term?
They don't give a shit about being part of the pack. They don't give a shit about fitting in. They don't give a shit about, did I get this right internship? Did I get into this class? Do I have this like status thing that everyone is going after, so I have to go after it as well? Like they don't optimize for short-term stupid little status things at all. It's funny, I joke, right? Like coming out of school, so many of my friends, back then the cool job wasn't being a programmer at Google, it was being a consultant at Accenture or a banker at Goldman. And so many of my friends didn't even choose their career. The masses chose their career, right? They went to Yale and everyone was like, oh, you should be a consultant. And they're like, oh, of course, I should be a consultant. I must get into the best consulting firm. That's all they knew how to do, was like, no, I must shoot for the best. The best what? I don't know. Point me in a direction and I'm gonna do the best. Like, because that's what school is. And everyone wants to replay that game over and over again. They're good at that game. Of course, we're all good at that game. We all got into good schools, right? So we all want to play games we're good at. And what was funny is that in the short term, those people look like they're winning. Like I remember being on Facebook, watching those people making fuck tons more money than I was, going on vacations and hitting on girls and having a great time. And I was sitting in like a room that was like 2 times bigger than my twin size mattress, working on my startup with 4 other dudes who didn't shower very often. And like our office was our apartment. And, you know, and Facebook's great. I mean, now it's Instagram. Back then it was like, Facebook's great at showing you how you're not as cool as your friends. Like how your friends are like doing better than you. And one of the things that I learned later is that it's a whole lot more fun doing cool, fun things when you're rich in your 30s than when you're poor in your 20s. And like putting in that time in my 20s meant that I'm beating all those people now, but all of them thought they were crushing me back then. And we have this saying at YC, which is don't peak in high school. Like, when do you want to win? The longer you can defer the feeling of winning, the more long-term strategy you can deploy. And oftentimes the bigger you can win. But like the faster you are to grab the win right in front of you, the cheaper that win is and the less long lasting it is, in my experience. Wow, this is like depressing stories hour. It all worked out well in the end. I'm doing very well now. Yeah, but I think it took me 5 or 6 years to go on my first vacation after doing my startup. Yeah.
Hey, Michael, you actually mentioned something pretty interesting and funny to me, because I actually have that framework thought. Coming from a first-generation low-income background, I just signed an investment banking offer, and that was like my pursuit. But I'm kind of in this dilemma at the moment because I want to be an entrepreneur, but I have this very lucrative checking career that seems, but I don't want to sell my entrepreneurial dreams. What would be your advice to me coming from a low-income first-generation background and wanting to obviously help my family out, but also having the entrepreneurial drive and willing to put in the hours anyways?
I would say my advice to anyone here who's in that position is you're doing a deal. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you're doing a deal with the devil, going to a Goldman or going to a Microsoft or a Facebook or da-da-da-da. Make a plan. Make a plan, right? That those organizations have plans to either retain you or to eat you up and chew you out. In banking, it's eat you up and chew you out. In Facebook, it's retain you for life. Right? They have plans. They literally have teams thinking about, in banking, how do we separate the top 10% from everyone else and fuck everyone else? And in Facebook, it's like, how do we get you to like your job changing the like bottom corner of the settings page on, you know, Instagram for a shitty Android phone somewhere in the world, right? Like, so they're both kind of set up to kind of compensate you, to give you status, to give you perks, to give you money and equity and all these things to kind of keep you around. And if you want to break out, you can make a plan to break out. Maybe that plan is we're going to save this much money so that we can continue to support our family, even when we're doing a startup. Or our plan is, I don't know, but come with a plan. And you're much better off than if you are coming and just assuming that working someplace, their interests are going to push you towards the eventual goal you want to go to. And we actually made a video about this. I think we made a video called Breaking Out of FANG that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. So check out the YouTube, the YC YouTube, you'll see that coming out. But like, I don't think doing a FANG job or doing a banking job is bad. I think it's just bad to do it without a clear plan if you want to be a founder as to how you're going to break out before they trap you or kick you to the curb. But by the way, I don't believe in doing the startup at the same time.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Thank you so much for the advice, because my plan is also to learn the technical skills and just be able to network in those spaces. So
yeah, I don't believe that's important. I literally think I gave you the exact advice I wanted to give you, which is save money.
Save money?
Save money. You're going to be around a lot of people who are going to be spending money and going on fancy Instagram trips and fancy dinners and fancy apartments because they're making a fancy new wage. And if you want to break out and do a startup while still being able to chip money home, don't do those trips. Don't do those dinners. Save your fucking money. Like, the networking inside of banking ain't going to help you do a startup. The software stuff you learn during your startup is going to happen 10x faster and better during your startup than working at a bank. But the one thing that won't happen is money.
For sure.
Save your money.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Cheers. Artie's next.
Hey, Michael, I got a question. I was just wondering, what do you think about students like starting a company or a startup like in college? Like, if that's a good idea, bad idea, like what are your thoughts?
I think it's way overhyped. I think it's basically fake. How many of y'all know someone who's started a fake startup in their in college right now, where you know it's fake? Like, you know, the second they get their Google offer, they're going to Google, right? Or how many of them started a startup because it's literally like something they want to put on their resume, right? Like, don't do that. Like, if you want to start a startup, fine, but like, startups are all in. Otherwise, enjoy college. Fuck, man, I got this message in college and I fucking almost flubbed it. Like, I started enjoying it at the very end. This shit ain't ever happening again. Like, you're never going to be around this number of smart people with this relatively little to do ever again in your fucking life. Like, enjoy it, make friends. Like, you didn't even have to get good grades. Like, enjoy it. I think that if you are compelled to do a startup, great, do it. But don't feel like you're behind if you don't. You're not behind at all. You know, the median age of YC founders now is like somewhere between like 29 and 31. Like, that doesn't mean you should wait that long. I would say the median age of successful founders is younger than that. But, you know, if you're 19 and you feel like the game is like gonna pass you by, congrats. You feel like every other 19-year-old for the last 30 years. Like, the game's still here. Game's not going away. Not going anywhere, trust me. Who's next?
I think that's Artem.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for your encouraging advice. I have kind of a sort of a follow-up on the previous questions, but with regards to international founders. I know a lot of international founders apply to YC, and I was just curious for your takeaways, because I'm currently in Berkeley and I just want to be around that community. And with war in Ukraine going on, affecting my family, I also have to worry about money. So I kind of have a plan, as you said, right? But in terms of regulations, maybe some like things I should look at,
Yes,
or
I'm happy to talk about this. So one, international founders are extremely generous with immigration advice. You need to email people. They will help you. That's number one. Number two, most founders that do YC can get an O1 visa, like almost all of them. It's shocking the number of founders that use YC. Like one of the advantages for them of doing YC was to like get a visa. Third, some things are changing. Like, we lobbied the government for some weird rule changes to make it easier for companies to get visas in America. We're running that experiment right now with our first 10 to 20 founders going through a new process. I forgot what it's called. If that works, it's going to be even easier. But like, the immigration game is like a very tricky game, but like, there are people who have done it who are very, very helpful. So like, the more you're thinking about doing it by yourself, the more I would encourage you to not. Like, a good immigration lawyer plus talking to some founders who've done it recently, super, super valuable. And the other game that people play is the H-1B transfer game. That's a huge game. I love that game, right? You get that job at Facebook or Google or yada, yada, yada. Your friend starts a company, you do an H-1B transfer, boom, you're in the game. There's so many fun tricks. Like, there's so many moves, you know, trust that there's a path if you want.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Who's next?
Hey, Michael, we have another person in class.
Attack.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good.
So I've noticed that YC has had a couple civic tech platforms like Impactful. What did they do to make sure that they didn't run into any political legal problems? Like right now, like I know for like Impactive, like it's important that they actually have like the platform status rather than the publisher status.
Now,
How do
how about we
they?
just summarize all this stuff from the beginning? Lawyers are not incentivized to go after poor startups.
Nice. Okay, sick.
Because like, in the end of the day, like this is something I had to learn directly, right? Like, so Twitch started as a company named a product called Justin TV. And Justin TV was the first site online that had a whole bunch of live video on it. And a ton of it was copywritten, right? So you could watch like the Super Bowl and you could watch like Premier League soccer and like a bunch of sports from around the world on Justin TV. And for years. Now, was this against the law? Well, everything is a little cloudy, right? There's one set of laws that basically says these folks should be fucked. There's another set of laws that basically said, oh no, it was the users streaming the content. It wasn't us. We were just a platform, right? And then lawyers get paid like billions of dollars to debate this. And what I learned, we got sued a couple times when we were bigger and, you know, didn't hurt us really at all. What I learned is that like in school, law is taught as like right or wrong, almost like in like a household, right? Almost as if like, if you do something bad, the reaction is immediate, right? You do something bad and your mom smacks you in the face. So you like touch the hot stove and you're burned immediately. That's not how laws work in the real world for the most part. Now, if y'all go and fucking murder someone, yeah, law is going to happen to you pretty hard and pretty fast. But there's a lot of law that's basically gray area, right? Was Airbnb legal or illegal when it started? Was Uber? Was DoorDash? Was Instacart? Right, like, And so I think that what happens is that founders can kind of psych themselves out with this wrong view of the law. And it tends to be the case that if you're helping people, like people aren't getting hurt, and people really like your thing, the law changes or the law moves to the side. If you're hurting people, the law will get you. And so if you think of it more like a system that operates over the course of years and tries to punish the people who are hurting people and tries to move out of the way for people who are helping people, that's a much better way of thinking about how law works than like parents saying like your curfew is this time or like, you know, these things like this. And the other fun thing about the law is it's so slow. It's so slow. Oh my God. Like we got sued by the company that the former prime minister of Italy was running, like one of the biggest media companies in Italy. And I literally remember, one, the lawsuit took 3 years. So it was like, odds are we would have just died during those 3 years because like, you know, we fucked up something in our startup, right? So the lawsuit wasn't going to kill us. But the second thing that was really hilarious is I remember there was a really important part of the case that was happening. And then August 1st hit. And we were supposed to get this update. And like our lawyers weren't emailing. And so like I emailed the lawyers, no response, our lawyers in Italy. And so I call the law firm on the phone and I'm like, what the fuck's going on? And the person who picks up the phone is like, I'm the only one here. It's August. The whole court system is shut down. All the lawyers are on vacation. The whole country's on vacation. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is, okay, like, I guess it's not that big of an emergency. And, you know, moved on with my life. Like, that's the legal system. So, by the way, that's not like, you know, let's be clear, that's not licensed to go hurt people, but it's just a little bit more color on what the system really is. Who's next?
In the interest of time, should we take all the hands that are up right now, given they've been waiting for a long time? I want to make sure to protect Michael's time as well. Awesome.
Yeah, I can go a little longer. Let's do it.
That's great. So Amma, over to you.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you again. And I have two questions. One is about remote work and the other one about internationalization. So with the first one, you know, what we saw oftentimes is that, yeah, nowadays people get very frustrated in remote work when people have different schedules. You know, everybody is in different time zones, having different work styles, and which leaves little room for synchronous communication. So YC being remote and teams growing in remote, how do teams overcome these challenges from like diversity and, you know, when they don't spend X hours in the office where inclusion kind of happens naturally?
My first answer is, I don't know, we're all seeing. Sorry, I got better than that.
Good. I mean, yes, right. We don't have any data on that, so it's difficult
We
to
don't know.
ask.
We're all seeing. What's your second question?
So we are right now in the process of flipping our German company into a US corporation.
Oh
And
God, that's painful, isn't it?
yeah, well, we learned from the best. So we talked to a few YC companies that did the process. So we are in good hands, but we still have the question whether it's enough for like US investors to just have like a US holding as form as like a financial entity, or do investors here and especially customers rather prefer to even have an operating Inc. or
customers neither know nor care. And whatever the other YC companies who have done this has done, just copy them.
Okay. And the last question is about like product discovery. So
1 second. You stuck in a third question and we're in lightning round. So let's go to the next one. If there's time at the end, we can do question 3. Who's next?
Samantha, over to you.
Hi, Michael. It's nice to meet you. I'm going to try and keep my questions brief. So the most recent YC batch is the most international we've seen, and most of those international companies come from emerging markets. And you're also an LP in several Africa-specific funds. So my 2 questions are, what's most exciting for you in investing in founders and companies in emerging markets? And 2, what do you think founders of developed markets can learn from emerging market founders and vice versa?
I will say this. Most of the people in the world don't live in America. So I don't really think of this as, I want to be very careful to not think of this as like some kind of weird new investment thesis. I really think what's going on is that because of COVID, we were able to change the program in a way that made it more possible for international founders to do. And that's what we're seeing, as opposed to YC saying, we want to go international now. That's not what happened. And our whole mental model is if a good founder applies, we want to take him. So that's what I would say there. Ooh, this is a little depressing. Your second question, what can founders in developed markets learn from emerging market founders and vice versa? I think not very much. I think, unfortunately, too many emerging market founders are trying to copy products in emerged markets to their peril. One of the really fun things about working in YC is we get to take these regions of the world that are emerging and have them talk to each other, because their challenges are almost always comparable to each other, right? Like the Nigerian companies can learn a lot from the Indian companies, can learn a lot from the Indonesian companies. And what's cool is that all of these emerging markets, you know, outside of YC, their reference point is US. And they think, how do I take from the thing in US and bring it here? But once we introduce them to each other, they start realizing, oh, like, well, there are all kinds of ways to solve problems, oftentimes better ways to solve problems than the US way, which was like oftentimes built in the 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s. And so that cross-pollination is actually what I find most exciting. Like when those different emerging market founders can talk to each other and then be like, oh, we could do it like they do it in India. That's really great. And that's subtle, by the way. I don't think people really know about that. That's kind of, maybe that's one of our secrets. I don't know. Who's next?
Ruth. Hey,
Michael. Hey, Michael, my name is Josh. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Josh. I think the order I see is Ruse, Annie, and then Josh. You're last but not least.
No problem.
All right.
No problem,
We'll
sorry.
circle back to you in a sec.
Yeah. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much. I just have one question, and it's basically just giving you the opportunity to sort of pitch YC. So why should a founder participate in YC? Or in other words, what makes YC unique as a program?
So here's what I'll say. Let's talk brass tacks for a second. In some weird way, this is a marketing conversation. And I'm the used car salesman, right? And you walked onto my lot and you asked me, why should I buy this car? My incentives are a little fucked up here, right? So here's what I'll say, and I think this is why YC is good. Talk to people who did it. If all of them tell you that they loved it, consider doing it. If all of them told you it sucks, trust them. They don't have any incentives, right? Like, they're not going to make money if you do YC. They're not going to lose money if you don't. There's no incentives. And I can talk about all the cool things that YC does, but I think the thing that's consistently surprises me is like, what percentage of the founders, when we say, why are you doing YC? Their answer was, well, I talked to my 3 friends and they really liked it. So yeah, I mean, that's the game. I'd rather you judge us on those 3 random conversations you have, and like, you know, knock on wood, you have the conversations with the right people, but I think you will. And I don't think there are many products like that in the world. And I think that we're all using a lot of those products, because like when we ask our friends, what's the best product? They're like, this one. And then we use it and we're like, oh yeah, it's really good. I think YC in that way is like a product, and it's good. And yeah. And, you know, I've been on both sides. I've been a YC founder twice, right? So like, I've given YC 7% of my company twice. Like, and now I'm working here, right? So, hey. And I don't need to work, so that must say something, right?
All right, our second to last question,
Thank you.
Annie, and then we'll take our last question from Josh. So Annie, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Michael, my name is Annie. I just had 2 quick questions. So the first one is, how would you recommend approaching the validation of like rough prototypes? For instance, right now we're trialing a system in some like small stores, and many people have advised like, don't over engineer it, don't like build out too much, like do the most basic thing, like even if it's manual like tasks. But at the same time, we want to make sure that like, you know, the system or like the product like is going to work in the real world.
No, you don't. Yeah, okay. We have this thing in YC, there's like a lot of counterintuitive advice, right? You know, you've been given the advice, build an MVP, and you don't believe it. You're asking yourself, how is the janky manual thing that has nothing to do with maybe the thing we want to build, how can it give us any evidence that the thing we want to build is good? Most people can't get their heads around counterintuitive advice. Most people are kind of like single layer thinkers, like bam, they stop with the most obvious answer. But the smartest people can layer one level down. And the smart people are going to ask themselves, well, if the smartest people in tech are all telling us to build an MVP, and we disagree with them, but the smartest people are saying it, they must know something we don't. And let me try to summarize what that thing is. Your product is always changing. Your perfect vision for your product is complete dog shit garbage. Whatever it is, I promise you. By putting the MVP out in the world, you're testing 2 things. The first thing you're testing is there any demand at all? It turns out that what you really want to do is understand the demand for this problem that you're solving. That's way more important than your vision for what the product's going to be. The second thing you're doing is you're learning about the problem. So the kind of mental gymnastics you have to do is you have to say to yourself, y'all could build anything, but let's say you got a certain number of build points. And when you consume all those build points, your motivation dies and you give up. You'll want to spend all the build points right now. By going out with the shittiest thing that uses the least number of build points, you can gain insights that allow you to spend down those build points effectively. By going balls to the wall with all your build points up front, if you're wrong, you and your friends are working at Google 3 months from now because you used up all your juice. And what's really cool is when you get that shitty MVP out there, I mean, a couple of times what'll happen is users will be like, this is the best thing ever. And you're like, what the fuck? This is complete crap. Like, I can't believe you like this thing. That's a really good sign. More often than not, users will be like, I don't care about this problem. Fuck whatever solution you make. I don't even care about the problem. That problem's not a top 3 problem in my life. So even if you handed me the iPhone 27 version of it with billions of dollars of R&D behind it, I would give you a big middle finger because I just don't care. Man, those things are really valuable to learn, right? How can you learn them cheaply and quickly? That's our game. That's our game.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. Thank you. Thanks for that. And just one last thing is,
Sure.
I guess almost about like something very similar about this, like counterintuitive advice. Like often people sort of say, don't worry too much about what people think and how they sort of view your product. But at the same time, when it comes to getting investors on board and getting more like customers, there's a certain element of like pitching yourself, pitching your team, pitching your idea, and like presenting it in a certain way. And how do you like approach like balancing those two things? Like, there's a certain level of fake it till you make it, but at the same time, it's like you want to just do the problem, like solve the problem that you care about.
Okay, we live in a world where founders spend 10 times more than they should moving pixels around on their pitch deck than talking to customers and delighting them. In that world, I feel confident saying, put infinite effort towards talking to customers and delighting them, because I trust that if I readjust you even 90%, you'll still be spending too much time moving pixels around in your fundraising deck. Investors want to invest in founders building products that people love. Actually, let me say that statement again. The best investors want to invest in founders building products that people love. No one else matters. If you think, let's be clear, if you think that hiring a professional designer is going to get your company funded because that professional designer is making your deck look like a thing, would you respect the investor who made decisions based on whether or not you hired a deck designer? Would you respect that human? Would you want them to be involved in your company in any way? Would you want your employees to do that kind of shit? No. Now, like if you make something that's dog shit and no one could read, then you look like an idiot. But like if you also come in with fucking professionally made videos and crazy shit, and it's like, what the fuck are you doing? So much of this game is like, outside of delighting customers, do the minimum to be sufficient and move the fuck on. Like, the legal stuff, minimum to be sufficient, move the fuck on. Hiring, minimum to be sufficient. Spending money, minimum to be sufficient. Move the fuck on. Customers, everything. That's the game. And the last thing I'll tell you about this game is that in the short run, you will see your friends with fancy decks and nothing done get funded. Happens all the time. Fuck, we'll take some of them by accident. Hate that. Fucking hate that. In the long run, everyone's going to be judged on the same metrics. You delight your customers, you'll win in the long run.
That answers a lot of the questions in chat as well. Always this ultimate focus on customers. And as promised, last but not least, Josh.
All right, let's do it.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of pressure. But
don't fuck
thanks
up,
for all the
Josh.
advice. First and foremost, Michael, I resonate. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. But I resonate with a ton of the advice you were given. So just a brief precursor. I'm a startup founder, and I founded my first startup in college, still working on that same startup, Moves. And we're in a position where we've already validated our model. We have customers, we're cash flow positive, and throughout the whole journey of our startup, we were bootstrapping, using retained earnings to put back into the company, launching 2 apps on the App Store, et cetera, et cetera. And we're still in the phases where we're using.
Josh, what's the question?
Yeah. So the question is, what advice would you give for startups, founders who are still bootstrapping and using revenue to push their product? What advice would you give them to hit that next level to where they need to grow or scale?
The first thing I would say is like, bootstrapping is not bad. I have a friend who built a company called Instant Domain Search. There's a little website where you can search for domains, and then if you want to buy them, it redirects you to GoDaddy. He built that product 15 plus years ago. It generates between $20,000 and $50,000 a month in revenue. Takes about 8 hours a month to maintain. That guy's winning. So this idea that like a bootstrap thing is either needs to become a venture-backed thing or needs to die is not something that I ascribe to at all. I think if you want it to be a venture-backed thing, if it's software, if it can scale, if you've got technical co-founders who are building software and there's obvious ways that it can scale, go raise money. If you don't and you want to reinvest your profit in your business, go do that too. There isn't a right or wrong kind of path there. I think the right or wrong path is that if you're doing one when you want to be doing the other. If you really want to be a bootstrap company, but everyone's telling you, oh, why aren't you raising money? You're being an asshole. You should raise money. All the cool kids raise money. Those people should go fuck themselves. Who cares? Right? On the flip side, if you're like, oh, I want to be a venture-backed startup, this could be venture-backed, but I'm too afraid to fundraise or something, then it's like, get over it. Just do it. All right.
Thank you.
With that, thank you so much for your time, Michael, and for going well beyond our scheduled time to answer everyone's questions. I'm sure there's a ton of resources they have to follow up on, especially including YC's blog, the YouTube channel. We'll send all those links out to all the students afterwards. With that, thank you so much again, and we will hopefully see you again next semester.
Yes,
Take care, everyone.
in person. See y'all later.
Thank you, Michael. See you. Bye.